friends, welcome back. This is Taurus, Elbow Bump. How are you? Are you doing okay? How is your family? Remember, if you need anything, just send me a quick email and I will do my best to make sure that you get what you need. Okay, so lucky you. You get to hear my voice again for another lecture, but the best part is that we'll be continuing to learn about qualitative and quantitative data. Yay! Yesterday, we talked about how qualitative data is really about describing characteristics that can't be measured. Let's look at a table with some information and see if we can take some of this information and put it into our StatCrunch, just to do a little bit of a warm-up. Here is some information that wants to compare two sets of data, and it's qualitative because the categories that it's set out is the different types of marital status. So there's never married, married, widowed, and divorced. And then also they have two different years. They have millions of people were in each of the categories in 1990. And then how many millions of people were in each of the categories in 2006. So I'm going to go ahead and start by taking this information in my data set, taking this table. I'm going to go ahead and paste it into this whiteboard thing that I've been using called Ziteboard. Now, Ziteboard is this really cool dry erase board that I can use in order to write things out, just like if I were using a whiteboard. And if you look in the description box, you will see a link that takes you exactly to where this Ziteboard is. So you'll be able to see what I've written on the board itself. Let's see, here I have the different marital statuses. Here I have the numbers in millions for 1990, and this is 2006. And let's just go ahead and add these up so that I can get an idea of how many people I'm working with here. And let's go ahead and add this up. First, I'm going to add up 1990. And if I clear this out, I always like to make sure this is clear. I've got 40.4 million plus 112.6 million plus 13.8 million plus 15.1 million equal. And I come out with 181.9. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. Go ahead and write that here. 181.9. All right, clear, clear, clear. In 2006, I've got 55.3 plus 127.7 plus 13.9 plus 22.8 equals. And here I have 219.7 million. I'm going to go ahead. If I were having to do this by hand, I would have to convert all of these into percentages. And I'm just going to go ahead, just do that just as some extra practice to get us warmed up. Now, if you know how to convert this into the percentages of this whole, pause the video and meet me on the other side and check your answers. If you're not sure how to do it, then watch me do 1990 maybe, and then maybe you can do 2006 by yourself. So this first one, what I did here is I added all these people up, all these different statuses. I added all these people up, and I decided that after adding it up carefully, there were 181.9 million people participating in the survey in 1990. 40.4 million were the never married people. So 40.4 of that entire amount, 181.9, came out to be 0.222. So I'm going to write that here. Okay, and if I wanted to see, clear, 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 what proportion of this total amount were the married people, okay, this next one, I know that 112.6 million of the 181.9 million are married. So 112.6 divided by 181.9 tells me that 0.619 are the married people in this group. 0.619. 13.8 million of the 181.9 million are the widowed people. And that is going to be 0.07586. I'm just going to go ahead and round that to 0.76. 0.076. And then finally, the last number here is talking about the people that were divorced. And let's clear this out. Clear, 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 clear. 15.1 million of 181.9 million is 0.083. 0.083. Looks good. Here I've done the relative frequencies. The relative frequencies are always written as a decimal. You can write these as a percent by just taking it out of 100 instead of out of one whole. So this would be 22.2%, 61.9%, 7.6%, and 8.3%. Now we're going to do the same thing here for 219. Okay, so 219, I need to bring over my calculator again. Clear this out. Clear, 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 clear. 55.3. This time my whole amount is 219.7 million. And I'm going to get 0.252. I'm going to go ahead and round. Let's scooch this over. 0.252. Awesome. Next one. Clear, click, 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 clear. 127.7 million divided by 219.7 million. And that is going to be 0.581 or 58.1%. So that's going to be 0.581. Perfect. Okay. Next group. Bring this over. Clear, 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 clear. Say it with me, everybody. Clear, 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 clear. 5 times. Clear, 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 clear. 5 times. Yeah. Okay. 13.9 million. Divided by 219.7 million. And I have 0.063 or 6.3%. So I'm going to go ahead and scooch this over here. And it's going to have 0.063. And the last one, do you know what I'm going to say? Clear, 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 clear. 22.8 divided by 219.7, and I'm going to get 0.1037, which is the same as 0.104. I'm rounding. That's all I'm doing is I'm just rounding. If we're looking at this as a whole, these two numbers are different. So if we're just looking at them relative to a whole, there's a slight increase here. There is a slight decrease here. There is a slight decrease here, and there is an increase here. So I went ahead and made it in StatCrunch, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it over here to my Ziteboard. If you look here, we've got 1990 in blue. Right, here's our key. And in this burgundy reddish color, we've got 2006. So let's look at the relative frequency. This is a percentage that we've written as a decimal. It's showing part of a whole. Here we have the blue, which is a little bit more than 0.2, which makes sense. This is 0.22, right about 0.2. Let's do all the blue first. The next one is 0.619, and here is 0.6, and here's just a little bit more than 0.6. The next blue one is the widowed, which is 7%, which is down here 7. And then divorced is right at 8%, which is just a little bit more than the blue, almost not noticeable. When compared to what's happening in 2006, which they've decided to code as this burgundy red color, you see that from 1990 to 2006, there's a slight increase. And we can see that slight increase right here. This was 0.222 and this is 0.252. So there's a slight increase. In terms of married people, it went down from 61.9% to 58.1%. And if we wrote that as a relative frequency as a decimal, we would see that this is the 0.619 and this is the 0.581, a drop. Here in the widowed, in the blue we had 0.76, which we already talked about was correct. And here it dropped down to 0.063, slight decrease. We can notice that here. Finally, the divorce rate increased. It went from 0.083 here to 0.104, which is here. So this is the relative frequency table. It's using these decimals in order to create this information. So why would qualitative data be important in statistics? Well, first of all, remember, qualitative data will describe. And in order for us to provide evidence that we are actually working with the population in question, we have to describe the characteristics of the participants so that the reader can say, oh, well, the question has to deal with these people, and these are the people that the researchers had selected, and they match, or they don't match. Maybe this is suspect. Let's see how we can use qualitative data, what we know about qualitative data and relative frequencies and making bar graphs and StatCrunch, and kind of start to put that all together in order to write a really strong paragraph describing who the people are in our sample. So I'm going to go ahead and start using that same data from StatCrunch to start writing a physical description. And as I said, the physical description is really a way to give the reader information about your sample, the characteristics of the participants or whatever in your sample, to make sure that you have met the same characteristics as the population. So I'm going to go ahead and go into StatCrunch. I'm going to open StatCrunch again. I'm going to go ahead and use my Cytomegalovirus data. So here's the data. The link is in the description box below. I've gone ahead and copied this. Okay, remember, click on this gray rectangle right here to select everything. You can right click and copy. I can go up to where it says var1 and Control V or Command V, and all my information is here. Now I want to go ahead and give some information about who these people are. And I want to use the qualitative characteristics of sex and race. And then I also want to include their type of diagnosis and then also their diagnosis type. Now remember, these two columns were columns that you were supposed to be working on your own. And I want to refresh my mind on what were these codes. So I need my code book. All right, let's find my code book. Okay, here's my code book. I've got to be super careful because one thing I noticed about this code book that if this were my study, I really would be upset about. It's a little thing, but I want you to notice this. Look at this. This is how mistakes can be made. Okay, so patient ID, it doesn't have any codes because it's just people's code number. We can work with the data and still maintain confidentiality. For age, it gives me the units. It doesn't have to be coded because age is quantitative type of data. For sex, it's going to give me codes. 1 male, 0 female. For race, it's going to give me codes. 1 white, 0 African American. And it's giving me 1 before 0. 0 comes before 1, so I'm going to end up screwing this up if I'm not careful. Then I want to do diagnosis. That's just what it is. Diagnosis type. Again, it has 1 and 0. And then it has time to transplant in months, so that is a quantitative variable. But here it says prior radiation. Did they have radiation prior to their treatment? Now they're using 0 no, 1 yes. So do you see how this can be confusing? One thing I would say, just as a matter of practice, always make sure that you keep some sort of system so that it makes sense to you, because I actually had to redo this whole section over again because I had recoded it incorrectly because I was looking at the code book, not reading it very carefully, and yep, screwed it all up. Now I've got to be careful, okay, because I already screwed it up once. So let's look at the code book. Take your time. Remember, we talked about error. Human error is one of the things that can happen. So we've got to just make sure we take our time. 0 female, 1 male. So for sex, I'm going to go ahead and go down to where it says Recode, sex, and I'm going to go ahead and replace the current column. So instead of this being 1s and 0s, I'm going to make it the word male and female. So I'm going to go ahead and compute, and 0 is female, and 1 is male. I'm going to hit compute, and if you take a look at the sex column, you're going to see everything change. Okay, now I'm going to go to race, do the same thing, data, recode, race. I'm going to go ahead and have it replaced. Normally, I like to make another column separately, but since this has a lot of variables and I don't want to have to scroll back and forth necessarily, I'm just going to go ahead and replace it for now. Compute, let's see, 0 is going to be African American, and 1 is going to be white. Look at my race column, and it's going to turn into words. Diagnosis type. Diagnosis type is interesting because it has 1 is myeloid and 0 is lymphoid. I didn't know what these two different types of diagnoses were, and I knew that just looking at what the diagnosis were for all these people, it looked like they had some sort of cancer, right? For diagnosis type, it has, let me see, 1 for myeloid and 0 for lymphoid. So I thought it might be interesting to look what that is. Both of these are types of cancers that affect different types of cells in the body. So depending on what kind of cell is affected by that disease, your blood has all kinds of different types of cells in it, different kinds of, and your immune system has like all these different kinds of defense mechanism cells that help you fight off diseases. Depending on which one is being affected, it's either a myeloid cell or a lymphoid cell. So I'll go ahead and put this information in the description box below in case you're interested, but it's basically just telling you what kind of cell is being affected by that cancer. So we're going to go ahead and recode this. Go to data, recode, and I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a little bit to diagnosis type. I want to go ahead and have it replace again. And this time, 0 is going to be lymphoid, 1 is going to be myeloid, and blank, let's just say unspecified, because they didn't say. So then I hit compute, and this time we're going to look to see if that changes. Boop, look at all those changes. Okay, so now we've got some categorical data or some qualitative data giving us information about these patients. And let's go ahead and make some tables describing what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and use all my recodes. So recode sex, race, diagnosis, diagnosis type, and I want frequency, relative frequency, percent total. To select more than one thing, I'm going to go ahead and hit the control button as I click, or if you have a Mac, you would use the command button, and here we go. Now this seems like a lot, but really all it is it's 4 different tables. Okay, they just put it on one thing. So here I have 64 patients, and 30 of them are female, which is a relative frequency of 0.468, which is the same as 46.8%. Notice again, here is a decimal is 0.4, and here the decimal is 46.8. So it's just the difference of the decimal being at a different place. Here, relative frequency is thinking of the whole as 1, and percent is thinking of the whole as 100. Male is 34, there's more males, so approximately 53% percent of them, 53.1% of them are male, and if we were writing that as a relative frequency, it would be 0.53. Overwhelmingly, there are many more white patients in this study than African American patients. African American patients only comprise approximately 9.3% or 9.4% of the total sample, whereas 58 patients comprise 90.6% of the overall sample. If I wanted to write that as a relative frequency, here is the information. Now, as far as frequency table for results, you see that overwhelmingly acute myeloid leukemia and non-Hodgkin lymphoma are the predominant diagnoses for these patients, followed by, how would you say this, myelodysplastic syndrome, I hope that's right, or multiple myelomas. Those would run closely behind. Okay, there's a lot of information in that. In this situation, I would be like, do I really want to write all this out? I don't know. Let's look at this right here. We've recoded it for diagnosis type. We show that there are 28 patients that have a lymphoid diagnosis. That is approximately 43% of the total. A little bit more have myeloid, which is 46% of the total. There are approximately 6 patients, which comprise 9% of the total sample, that have an unspecified diagnosis type. All right, so here we have all the information about these patients, and we want to start writing up what we know about them. Okay, let's go quickly back here to this and talk about writing a physical description. The reason why we write a physical description is because we want to give readers information on how many people are in the study. Remember, small sample size, there's a lot of error with a small sample size. Here we have 64 people. It's not a huge sample size, but it's not like 5 people, okay? So they have an idea of how many people are there. Is it the greatest sample size? No. Is it as best as we can do? It is. So you report it, that's all. The type of study, the participants, and so that you can clarify whom the study findings will apply to, and also identify possible sources of error or limitations. Also, you want to make sure that you report this information in case this ever has to be replicated in the future. People that are replicating it have an idea of who you worked with originally and how well their sample will align with your sample. Okay, they're not going to necessarily try to get the exact same people. Typically, we write the physical description in the past tense because it's by the time your research has published, many things may have changed. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a Word file here, just a document. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and use our StatCrunch information from just the tables and start writing up a physical description for this data set. This physical description will be linked in the description box below. So if you want to use this as an example of how you can write physical descriptions in the future, you can. Also, I will cut-paste the information into a slide. My hope is that you will have an example that you can follow. So the first thing we want to say is where we got this data. So we can say the Cytomegalovirus data was provided by Professor Torres on Google Sheets. And indent my paragraph. I'm going to put data and codebook. And associated code book was provided by Professor Torres on Google Sheets. The data was recoded with the written variables. For example, gender, race, for ease of use. Okay, the sample data, I'm going to put the size of it. So N equals 64. Consisted of 30 and then 46.88% female patients and 34 parenthesis 53.13% male patients. Okay, so now I've written the first part of the physical description, which is saying where I got the data, what I did to it. Basically, I coded it. That's the only thing I've done so far, how big it was, and I talked about the genders that made up the sample. Let's talk about the racial demographics. So I can write there were 6 9.38% African American patients and 58 90.63% white patients. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the diagnosis types. The patients' diagnoses were categorized into 3 diagnosis types. Lymphoid, which was 28 parentheses 43.75%. Myeloid, 30, and then 46.88%, and unspecified, which were 6 of them, and there were 9.38%. More specific information regarding diagnoses can be found in Table 1. So this way, if anybody wants to see how the different specific diagnoses, I guess, instead of categories, they were like specific diagnoses, were distributed, they can just go to the table. Because honestly, the information that's here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different diseases or conditions is a little bit much for a simple physical description. Let me read this back. It says the Cytomegalovirus Data, and actually does that need to be capitalized? I don't think so. An associated codebook was provided by Professor Torres on Google Sheets. The data was recoded with the written variables, e.g., that means, for example, gender, race, for ease of use. The sample, n equals 64, consisted of 30 46.88 female patients and 34 53.13% male patients. There were 6 9.38% African American patients and 58 90.63% white patients. The patients' diagnoses were categorized into 3 different diagnosis types. Lymphoid, 28, and that's 43.75. Myeloid, 30, that's 46.88%. And unspecified, 6, which is 9.38%. More specific information regarding diagnoses can be found in Table 1. So really, really simple. First sentence, where did you get the data? Second sentence, what did you do to it when you got it? All we did to it at this point was recode the information. But one thing I can add, the data was recoded using Pearson's StatCrunch, comma, the data was recoded, ignore that. Actually, you know what? Let's put in that we used frequency tables, and frequency tables were created for the qualitative variables. The Cytomegalovirus Data and associated codebook was provided by Professor Torres on Google Sheets. Using Pearson's StatCrunch, the data was recoded with written variables, e.g. gender and race, for ease of use, and frequency tables were created for the qualitative variables. The sample, n equals 64, consisted of blah, 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 blah. These 2 very short paragraphs tell the reader where this data came from, what we did to it, and it also gives qualitative information about the patients in the sample. So here is my summary. Now let's make some graphs for this. Let's go ahead and do a plot with data, and let's go ahead and do sex. We're gonna do count, percent total. Here's a pie chart. Here it's got 46.88% are female and 53.13% are male. If I wanted to do this as a bar plot, I should be able to do that as well. Let's see, this would be sex and compute, and here would be female and male. I could do the same thing with the other qualitative variables. And what's kind of nice with some of these is you can just select them all, again, holding down the control key or the command key for more than one thing that you want. This time I'm just going to stick with percent and compute. And if you notice down here, you've got little arrows that will help you go from place to place. You can get fancy with the colors that you want, etc. These just have to be chosen. You would do the same thing with bar graphs, etc. Okay? So yeah, so this is kind of nice the way that it's all sort of laid out for you. It's very simple to use. I think it's simple to use. So what's the big idea? Today's big idea is that there are two different types of data: qualitative data, which describes characteristics, and quantitative data, which describes an amount. When you're working with a sample, it's important to describe the characteristics of the sample as evidence that the sample represents a population. Using StatCrunch can help you recode some of your variables so that they're easy to create into either bar graphs or pie charts that associate with the qualitative data that you're using. Remember, bar graphs, pie charts are for qualitative data. So that's it for the day. With that said, don't forget to check your emails, check Blackboard, do your homework, and subscribe to this channel. Even better, hit that notification bell so you know when there are new videos for this course. Okay? This is your teacher, Taurus, saying stay safe, and I will be waiting to give you a virtual elbow bump in the next video. Ciao!